Hello, my name is Ryan from Buster Beagle 3D, and today I'm going to be doing a review of the ComMarker Omni1 5-watt UV laser engraving machine. This is my first ever UV laser, and don't let the 5 watts deter you because since this is a UV laser, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities I haven't had with any of my other machines. However, it's not without its own set of quirks, so what do I think of it? And is it the type of laser for you? Well, let's find out. First, as usual, I want to thank ComMarker for providing me with this machine for my complete and honest review. There are affiliate links in the video description that do help out the channel if you use them, but they do not influence my opinion on the machine one way or the other. ComMarker does not have any say in what I talk about, and I did run into an issue or two that I will talk about, and I feel that the most honest review without omitting issues is the most useful review. The machine did come well packaged where it was double boxed with plastic protective corners on it, but that was no match for UPS and their handling of the package. The package is about 52 pounds and not small, so the first casualty of this was what is called the preview helper. It's an acrylic window which assists in being able to see the outline of your jobs on certain objects as the UV laser works at a 355 nanometer wavelength, so it's in the ultraviolet or UV spectrum, which is outside of the visible spectrum that we can see. So depending on the material you're trying to engrave on, you may or may not be able to see the laser's preview, so this window helps with that issue. You could also coat the surface with something like a highlighter, which is what I did on glass to catch a glimpse of where that light is. I also found myself simply using a piece of paper and hovering it over my pieces to see that framing. It's really one of the largest downsides to using a UV laser, as it's really not always easy to see where that framing occurred. Lowering the light in your area does sometimes help with this, but it's not always the solution. The machine also comes with a really nice ruler to measure your focal height. I have a few of these now from other ComMarker machines, and I have to say they are always my most accurate rulers that I have gotten from any company, especially since the ruler edge starts exactly at the 0 mark. Next is a foot pedal for hands-free or batch processing, followed by a lifting table so that you can move the items up and down for the height adjustment instead of the entire laser head. We also have a USB stick with all of the drivers, software settings, and manual to get you started. Next, we have a bag with the tools, brackets, and a USB cable to connect your machine to your computer. Then there is a nice little material kit to test out different things that you can engrave on with this machine. Then, of course, we have some safety glasses that are pretty nice and even have the wavelength that they are supposed to be able to protect against printed right on the lens themselves, which is always nice to see. Then we have the tower, then we have the UV laser itself. The machine comes installed with a 150mm lens, but also comes with a 70mm lens to swap out if you want to work on smaller and more detailed objects. And finally, we have the guts and base of the laser for everything to attach to. So this is everything that comes in the box, and assembly is pretty straightforward and simple to do. Essentially, you need to attach the tower to the base, then you attach the laser to the tower and plug in all the wires, and you're pretty much ready to go. This is where I ran into the second issue. As I have stated before, the shipping seemed like it had taken some lumps, so when I plugged in the wires for the electrical height adjustment, nothing happened when I pushed the buttons on the front of the machine. I actually reached out to ComMarker support, and they did get back to me trying to clarify the issue, but I decided to do some investigation even before I had heard back, and what I found was that the power supply inside must have come loose, and it knocked the wires that came from the front buttons to the relay that controlled the motor, so that's why it wasn't working. I just reconnected what had been knocked out, and everything was working as it should. Now, I don't blame QC from ComMarker for this, as again, the shipment was double boxed and well protected, but you can't always protect from poor shipping and handling. Only reason I'm bringing it up is because it happened, and I will tell you guys the entire experience in case you happen to run into the same issues. With everything now functioning properly, it was time to start testing with my computer. The Omni1 comes with a JCZ fiber control board that can work with either EasyCAD 2 or Lightburn as the software to control the machine. I will be using Lightburn as it is my program of choice, but it's a paid program where you would have to purchase the GVO license to use it. I use it already on my other machines and highly recommend it, but if you wanted to use a free piece of software, you can use EasyCAD 2 that comes on the USB stick. I won't go into the installation of the software as you can follow along with the instructions in the manual, but if you wanted to use EasyCAD 2 or are going to be importing the configuration files into Lightburn, make sure you open it from the correct folder. If you're using the 150mm lens, which is installed when you get the machine, use the files or the EasyCAD 2 exe from the software 15 folder. If you happen to install the 70mm lens on your machine, then use the data in the software 7 folder. So with the laser together and the software installed, let's take a quick tour of the machine itself. On the front of the machine, we have the main power button and the 2 up and down buttons for the electronic height adjustments that I was talking about before. You will need to adjust the height to find the proper focal range to mark on the objects you are trying to engrave on. This height adjustment can also be made manually with a knob at the top of the tower. Next to the power button is an emergency stop button that will shut down the machine if it is pushed in. If you try to turn on the machine and nothing happens, it's usually that button was pushed in. Just twist it clockwise and it'll pop out. Now there are actually 2 power buttons on this machine. The first one that I just talked about, and the second one on the laser head itself. With the main power on, you then press the laser on-off button on the laser head, and it will blink blue and green for about 2 minutes until the laser head heats up and the light stays constant green. Only then is the laser ready to be used. Right in front of the lens, we have 2 laser pointers that should converge at the proper focal height of the object that I'm trying to engrave on, and I have to say it's been pretty accurate. If you want to measure the height manually without relying on the laser pointers, you can do that using the included ruler and measure from the surface of the part to the line on the laser head. There is also a ruler on the tower, but for whatever reason, they didn't include that little arrow that is typically on the moving section of the tower, so you can make micro adjustments as needed. I'm not sure why they didn't include or remove that arrow, but it would have been nice to have. I don't really see any other reason to have the ruler on there without that. On the back of the machine, we have the power cable, the data cable that plugs into your computer, a cable that attaches from the back of the machine to the tower to plug the motor controlling the height. There is also a hookup for a rotary that I don't have for this machine, but it would be for things like mugs, tumblers, rings, and other round objects. You also have the hookup for the pedal for those batch engravings, and finally, but curiously, is one for an enclosure. I'm honestly not sure what that would be for, or what it would control, since as of the filming of this review, I've not seen an enclosure for this particular model, but that may be for a future expansion. Okay, so this is all great, but what are the advantages of a UV laser over a diode, CO2, fiber, or MOPA laser? Again, all of those different types of lasers work at different wavelengths, which determine what type of material they are best suited to work on. What makes a UV laser different is that it's a much lower wavelength at 355 nanometers, which is about 100 nanometers lower than a blue diode laser. This allows for super high detailed engraving with a spot size of 0.0019 millimeters, which is far smaller than the standard 5-watt diode laser, and performs what is called cold ablation, where there is almost no heat generated to the surrounding area when engraving, which makes this ideal for thin metals, plastic, glass, and even wood, which again is not suitable on a regular fiber laser. Because there is little to no heat, there is no damage to the underlying surface. So if you are engraving on plastic, you can permanently mark the surface without burning the surface, so you can engrave without feeling it to the touch. At this wavelength, you can also engrave directly on the surface of glass without any preparation and without the risk of damaging the surrounding surface with heat. The higher absorption of the UV wavelength on the surface of the piece being engraved means the power can be lower. in this case only 5 watts, but allows the material to be processed at that lower heat, which protects the surrounding area. A good example of this was when I cut 3mm wood that came with the Omni laser. I was shocked that, as this was the first time I've ever seen this, where there was no charring whatsoever on the sides of the cut. No air assist necessary. They were completely clean. I have never encountered that with any of my other lasers before. Now, there is a little bit of a learning curve with a UV laser over other lasers, such as a diode, CO2, or even a fiber or MOPA laser. With a UV laser, since you are typically working with lower wattage, you no longer have control over power, as it's always set to 100%. So what you can control on a UV laser is the speed, frequency, Q pulse, and line interval. Really, the best way to figure out what settings work for what material would be to create some sort of material test grids and then test on them. Luckily, ComMarker has provided a material library that is a decent starting point for some materials, so that's what I use to start with, plus my own adjustments along the way, solely based on experience of working with lasers for years now. However, to really dial in the correct settings per material, further grid testing would be necessary. Okay, so enough blabbing. I'm going to show you what I was able to make with the machine, but I also wanted to point out that these were not all my first tries, so don't be discouraged if you need to play around with the settings a little bit. I will display my settings on the screen so you can use them as a decent starting point, but you may need to tinker. Most of these are first based off of the material library from ComMarker, with a few adjustments along the way. First, I wanted to grave into wood, so I engraved this little dog image into some wood that was provided with the machine. It did a super nice job and really has nice detail for a basswood engraving. It gave me a really nice contrast between the shades and looked really good. After I was done engraving the dog, I thought I might cut him out to test the cutting power of the machine. Now, at only 5 watts, I'm not expecting to cut too deep into the surface of objects, but it should be able to cut through 3mm fine. I cut the dog out, and to my surprise, there was absolutely no charring whatsoever on the side of the wood. I tried that again on another piece of wood with another design, and the same thing happened. There are absolutely zero burn marks or charring anywhere on the piece. Now, there is one downside of cutting with the machine like this, and that is because it's a galvo laser. If you've seen any of my other videos on galvo lasers, I always talk about this, but the issue is that a galvo laser works from a center point on the laser head, which means the source of the beam is always in the center. This means that the further you cut away from the center of the machine, the more angled the edge of the cut is going to be. This is an issue with any galvo laser, as you are never cutting straight down like you would with a gantry style machine. I then ran the same image on some scrap MDF board that I had, and I felt like I got an even crisper image, which turned out very nice as well. I did another image on wood, and this time it was a vector instead of an image, and it pretty much used the same settings as the image, and again it turned out great. Next, I wanted to make a Christmas gift for my mom, and I can pretty safely release this video before Christmas, as I'm pretty sure she's never watched one of my videos. I wanted to try out a bamboo cutting board, and if you have ever tried that on any machine, you would know how difficult it is to achieve a nice consistent engraving on bamboo, since there are so many grain variations with the board, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. It really turned dark on the second pass, which is honestly the darkest I've ever been able to achieve on these boards. I did have to go over a few sections a few extra times if it needed some extra love to be darker, but when you compare it to the board that I made on the right with a diode laser, you can see how much darker it is. This is after also treating the engraving on the right with a dark stain that I wiped away on every area but the engraving, and it still wasn't as dark. I wanted to point out another thing here, and that is that given the size of the workable area, I was not able to engrave this whole design at once. The workable area is based on the size of the lens, so with the 150mm lens attached, I would have about 150 by 150mm workable area. This particular design was made by engraving what I could fit and then moving the workpiece and engraving on another area. For something like this cutting board, it really worked out great. I next tried some felt that came in the material pack. Once again, it was very straightforward to cut and did not in any way char the sides of the material. As you can see, it almost looks like it could have been cut out with a blade. Another object that came in the material pack were these black painted aluminum business cards, and once again, they really worked really nice. It's super fine detail and one thing that Galvo lasers in general do a really nice job at. Also, since the laser is not generating heat, you don't warp cards like you do with a fiber or other lasers that do produce heat and can warp those cards if you're not careful. I also wanted to see just how small I could engrave, so I thought it would be fun to burn the entire Gettysburg Address onto one of the cards. It's so small that each letter is less than 0.5 millimeter tall. Here it is under a microscope next to the ruler that came with the machine. The letters are so small that you can still read them through the eye of a needle. It's pretty tiny. After that, for some odd reason, my material pack came with some leaves. It's not something I can say I've ever gotten in any other material packs, but I gave it a try and it worked pretty well. I first engraved my logo onto the leaf, and it looked pretty cool. It's amazing to see that the laser burned away the meat of the leaves, leaving the overall cell structure below. I ran a much more intricate pattern on the leaf to see how it would handle that, and again, it worked flawlessly. It's amazing to see the amount of detail that it removed, once again keeping the cell structure. Moving along, I wanted to test out some clothing. A UV laser is something that is used commercially to add wear or patterns to jeans, so I tested it on a small piece of old jeans material that I had. It did a very nice job of bleaching the surface without degrading the material at all. Even when you look at the back, you can't see any damage to the surface, so you know it's only on the front. I did the same thing to this scrap of cloth using my logo, and it behaved the same. While it's not quite as bright as the silkscreen logo that was painted onto the cloth, it's pretty close, and again, with no damage to the surface. Next up was glass. Again, you don't need to prep the surface with anything when engraving on glass, which is one of the best features of a UV laser, but I still needed to use a highlighter or some scribbles from a neon green Sharpie to be able to see the framing. The one thing I did notice was that when I engraved on glass, the focal distance was very important, and I didn't seem to have a very wide range where that focal distance was. I'm not using a rotary, so I was trying to engrave on this glass just straight on. It seems like the curvature of the glass was deep enough that I ended up having to lower the focal distance and run the process again to fully engrave into the surface. You can see here that the quality of the engraving matches very nicely to the professional engraving that was already done on the other side of this glass. I did it one more time on another flatter but still curved glass, and still had to run it twice at a slightly lower focal height to be able to engrave on the entire thing. Keeping with the theme of transparent materials, I next wanted to play around with clear acrylic. It did a great job, and the settings that I used gave it more of a textured and frosted look to the surface. I could envision doing this more where I invert the image and then engrave on the back, so I could use it for a coaster or something like that with a smooth face on top. I next wanted to test some opaque plastics. First, I ran a few different tests on black acrylic. It worked really well, and I was pretty happy with it, but I think I need to play around a little bit with the settings to still get a really good engraving. One was too bright, one was too dark, the other one was better, but I think I could push it even further. Next, I wanted to engrave on my Airpods case. Again, a UV laser is probably how Apple does this at the store when engraving on them, but these are my real Airpods, so it was a bit nerve-wracking since I didn't have a way to test it. It came out very nice though. It clearly only marked the surface without heating it, so I can't feel any type of raised surface like I can on the other AirPod cases that I have engraved on in the past. It was just a nice dark mark that came out great. I had also tried some tests on some ceramic mugs, which I didn't have much success with. I was not able to get a dark mark on white ceramic. I'm not even sure if you can. but it did remove the glaze layer, so I suppose I could coat the porous ceramic with a Sharpie and then clear coat over it, but I really need to do more investigation into that. I've also seen other videos where people were able to get bright white markings on colored mugs, but again, it may be the coating that I was trying to engrave on my particular mug, or I just need to do much further testing on ceramics to really tune in that proper setting, but that was just something I have not dialed in just yet. The last thing I messed with was stainless steel, and again, while I was able to achieve both light and dark markings, I feel like I still need to mess with the settings to get a better and more contrasting result. One way to somewhat achieve that is what is called Z-black marking on stainless, and to do that you actually go out of focus about 2 to 4 millimeters higher, which results in a much darker mark, which is why I think that arrow missing from the tower would have been very important. Also, I did get decent results, but it does break down slightly at angles, so I really want to dial that in a little bit more. Overall, I've been pretty happy with this machine so far. I feel like you are able to work on far more materials than a simple fiber laser can, and on a much less destructive capacity. It would not really be able to achieve super deep engravings on challenge coins like you typically see with fiber lasers, but it doesn't mean that it can't engrave into solid metal either. It really does open up the possibilities for working on those multiple materials with one machine. The fact that it can easily engrave and most amazingly cut into wood without any charring is incredible. Again, cutting with any Galvo style machine is not my first choice, but that really blew me away. The last thing that I really just wish I had with this machine would have been an enclosure. Now, I had some thoughts on the enclosure for the B6 Mopot laser I reviewed in the past, and I wasn't a huge fan. You may have noticed that I have been using the enclosure that I made for the B6 machine in this video, which turned out great. It's a bit small for this machine, but still gets the job done. It's just an important safety feature for a machine like this to protect your lungs from the ablated metal, smoke, fumes, and debris. I really hope to see a company come out with a similar design to what I had here, where it's small and compact and removable, and doesn't add to the overall size that the machine takes up. This machine is pretty large when compared to my B6 Mopa, so I really wouldn't want to add to the space that it takes up. So that's it. Once again, I wanted to thank ComMarker for sending me this machine for my honest review. Since this is going to be my last video of 2024, I also wanted to thank everyone for the great year, and I'm so grateful for the supporters, subscribers, comments, and likes on my videos. It's what keeps me going and is very much appreciated. I wanted to wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a safe, healthy, and productive New Year. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.